Hey everybody, thanks for being here today. I appreciate that. Hopefully you are doing well. I'm doing well. Having a good time lately building pots. And this is one that I put together just recently. I'm building some pots in preparation for the kiln conference that happens in October. And so I thought what I would do with this video is walk through the process of actually building the pot and the things that I think about and the things that I do. And I know that some of you are really expert potters, much better than I am. So maybe you just want to watch, or maybe not even watch it at all. Some of you are newer at it, and I hopefully will have some kind of hints and tips. I like to paint. I think I'm a much better painter than I am a potter. So I look for ways to make these things easier and better, because it's just not as much a natural thing for me as I think it is for some people. So maybe there's some ideas that you can walk away with. So in any case, this is going to be a voiceover today. Not sure how long it's going to take, but I think I'll just walk through all the different things that I'm thinking about and doing as I make the pot. Hopefully that is useful to you. And I do want to mention that this is a little channel, really a small channel compared to some things that are out on YouTube. So the thumbs up and the likes, the sharing with other people, all of that stuff really figures into the algorithm. And it just kind of helps a little channel like this get along. So I appreciate that, really do. Thank you so much. And I always respond to every single comment. So let's go ahead and get started here. So I start with a lump of clay here. This clay, I always use wild clay. It happens to be a mixture of two different types, both that I picked up on the Mogollon Rim in northern Arizona. But use whatever clay you want. And actually, Andy Ward did a pretty interesting video maybe 3 years ago about using commercial clay. If you do that, you have to add some temper. In my case, I use 20% temper. I pick up sand off the shore of Lake Superior, but you can use whatever you like. Now you can see, but I'm patting it out on a piece of cloth, just an old sheet. And if I didn't do that, it would stick to the countertop or the bench. So having something that it won't stick to really makes a big difference. And then you can also see that I'm using a rolling pin. In this case, I got the largest dowel available at Home Depot. I think they come in 3-foot lengths, and I just cut it out. And so that works really well. And I have a couple different ones, and if one gets kind of wet and sticky, then I can switch it out. The other thing here is you see these little sticks that I use, and they work great for me. Now, some people just pat out their clay, stick it in their cookie. It works out fine for them. But I do this all to get a more consistent kind of product. Now, did Native Americans originally use rolling pins and sticks to measure the thickness? I suspect no. So it's not authentic, but it works for me. And in these sticks, for me, they're a little bit less than 3/16 of an inch thick. If you're doing it, I wouldn't go more than 1/4 of an inch, but it just sort of depends on what you like and what you're comfortable with. I also find that when I roll it out, I need to keep flipping it over from time to time. Otherwise, it just doesn't roll out very well. It helps to kind of get a fresh start with each one. The other is, you'll see I try and kind of smooth out the wrinkles, because it will pick up the wrinkles on the other side. And it's just like rolling out pie dough. Start from the middle and work out to the edge. I try to keep it as round as I reasonably can. Eventually here you'll see that I trim it off before I put it in the cookie. And here I just take a scraper and smooth things out. I've heard that it sort of aligns the molecules in the clay, but in any case, what it does do is take out any little bumps and high areas, low areas, and then I trim it off to get it reasonably round to about the right size that I want. So the clay is rolled out, and now it's time to stick it into the pookie. and then just ease it in. And I really try to be pretty gentle here and all along the way to never force the clay to move quicker than it really wants to move. Now, in some cases, what I would do, and I probably should have done it here, is lay the clay over the bottom of another pot so you end up actually with kind of a hump hold and you get it started and then put it in the puki. So I do a variety of ways of getting this shaped. I'm kind of just using kind of a crimping pinch, bringing it up and pinching it together, kind of like a little bit of a pleat. Um, and again, I go round and round and round many times. If you go too quickly, the clay tends to crack. The other thing that I'm trying to do, and never completely successful, is to eliminate the little ridge that ends up happening when the clay meets the puki on the bottom side. And so what I try to do is to raise the side of the bowl up straight away from the edge of the puki so it doesn't overhang. Because what ends up happening, the clay is soft, it's going to sag a little bit, and sometimes you get a really significant puki line that makes it difficult. And I never am able to eliminate that all of the way. So here I'm using the scraper to kind of ease the clay up. But notice too that I have my hand on the inside, so I'm supporting the clay on either side. Well, whether I'm scraping from the inside or the outside, I usually will have my hand on the opposite side of the scraper to just kind of control the shape. So as I get a little closer to kind of where I want to be, I think it's just a good idea to kind of take a look at the profile. It is really a challenge, I think, to get all sides to be in the same shape. And so if they're a little bit wonky, I don't think that's a real big deal, but you want it to be reasonably close. And obviously to have an idea of what the end shape is going to be. A lot of times I'll look at pictures, or maybe I'll have an idea of a particular pot that I like, and I'll try to replicate that. So I have the shape that I want, and what you don't see is then I just put a cloth over it and let it sit for a couple hours, I suppose, to let that clay firm up. This clay is pretty good clay to work with. It's great clay to work with, but it doesn't have wonderful wet strength. And so by letting it set up, it's less likely to sag, and I'll end up with fewer puki lines. If you work too quickly and you have kind of floppy clay, it can sag really badly, and you're just kind of chasing the shape. And that just, it's better to be patient, I think. So I'm rolling out my next coil. You can see what I just did. I pat it a little bit flat, and then I turn it on this edge, and I kind of hit that against the bench to get that flat. The other thing that I do then is trim the edge of the bowl. Now, I wouldn't have to, but if you start with a flat trimmed edge on the bowl and you have a coil that is kind of flat, it just all fits together better. And what I really want to do is to avoid any issues with a weak seam here. Now I save all the little pieces. They go back in the bucket to make future pots, or sometimes I save the scraps to make sherds in the future. So the goal here is to just get a really good bond. And I rarely have issues with cracks, drying cracks or cracks after firing. And I always do it the same way. Now, I think everybody needs to be different, but I use my thumb and I just work around, I guess that's our clockwise kind of way, pushing clay down from the top coil down onto the pot that I have so far. So I've worked my way around, and you can see that I came up a little short, so I just trim off the edges on both sides typically, and then just find a piece that's going to fit in. It doesn't have to be exact. I don't worry about that too much. That's the nice thing about clay. You know, if you smear it all together, it sticks together. It's very different than wood or other kinds of materials, so it's pretty forgiving this way. You just want to make sure that you don't have any seam. So now, what I typically do, once I've gone around one way, I'm using a scraper now to smooth things out. It's not so much about smoothing as it is about getting a good bond. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll use my thumb, and if I went clockwise to bond it together, I'll go counterclockwise to get another layer, I guess, of bonding. But I work it on the outside quite a bit, just mostly to get a good bond, but then also to start developing the shape. So now that I have bonded the outside, I work to bond the inside. And this is kind of hard to see, but what I'm doing is using my thumb to push that top coil down into the bottom of the lower layer of the pot. This again, I frequently have trouble getting a good smooth even bond on this, so I'll work around at least once, sometimes twice. Again, I always work from the outside and then go to the inside, but I think it works different for different people. So here you can see a little bit better view of how I'm kind of pushing the clay down, but I'm also supporting it from the outside so it doesn't get kind of out of shape. So the inside is bonded, and now I just go to the outside and use the scraper to kind of get it the right shape, because sometimes it gets pushed out of round. So now that the coil is bonded, I can kind of start pushing that coil up and thinning out the pot. But you can see I'm also kind of smoothing out that joint down below sometimes as well. And I am not in a big hurry to get this to happen. I will frequently go around 2, 3, even 4 times. And I'm trying to feel too just how thick that coil is, or the side. Ideally, we end up with a pot that has very consistent thickness all the way around. That's not always the case, but you want to be reasonably clear about that. Um, So it's just, in this case, just a matter of pinching it up and thinking about what direction you want it to be. And in my case, it usually kind of wants to move to the outside. You'll see that it gets pretty wonky, and then I have to uh, narrow it down because of what I want. I'm almost at the point of where I want to start moving this pot to get a narrower diameter to it, I guess. It would actually be better here if, as I pinched it up, to also kind of push it in or pleat it together so that the pot didn't flare out so much. So here you can see how much the pot flared out. So I just kind of create more work for myself, but I use a scraper to kind of ease it into the shape I want. Sometimes I'll use my hands to kind of pinch it together to move it in the direction that I want. I'm also thinking along the way here of trying to avoid that pookie line, and so sometimes I'll kind of push the clay up away from the pookie. So you can see with the scraper that I'm not only moving it up, but I'm kind of moving it in to try and get the shape of the bowl the way I want. And then, so I not only scrape on the outside, but then I will move to the inside as well. And when I'm trying to smooth out some of those rough areas, but I'm also trying to create kind of the contour that I am looking for the final bowl. So using a scraper alone just wasn't enough, so now I am working my way around and pinching it together, kind of creating a pleat to reduce the diameter of the pot. So I have finally coaxed it pretty much into the shape that I want by scraping on the outside and on the inside, back and forth. And so I'm reasonably happy with it right now. And so what I'm going to do is just let it set up for a while for an hour or two to let all that clay firm up. And I just cover it with a towel so it doesn't dry out too quickly. So the pot has been setting for an hour or two, firmed up pretty good, so I won't have as much sagging. And I always keep smoothing it a little bit. One thing you'll notice is I'm not dipping my scraper in water. Sometimes you kind of need to do that, but you don't want to add any more water than you really want to. Otherwise, your clay will get floppy and sloppy. And it seems that with people who work on a wheel that they have a much wetter clay than hand building. But just like last time, I will trim off the upper edge, and that does a couple things. It gives me a flat edge, but sometimes that edge has dried out a little bit, and so I'll have a fresher edge. Occasionally, I will dampen that edge before I put on the coil, but if the clay is pretty fresh and pretty damp, I don't worry about that. And you see with other people that they will score and slip. That just doesn't seem to be necessary with this kind of pottery. Rarely do that unless the clay has really dried out. So I rolled out another coil. They're usually about the size of my thumb. Any bigger and it gets too much to handle. And so I apply it just like I did before. But in this case, I know I want my pot to be moving towards the inside, so you can see that I point the coil inward. If you want it to go to the outside, then you point it to the outside. So you just point the coil in the direction that you want the pot to go. So this is the same process as the first coil, so you don't need to see all of that. So here I'm doing two things with the scraper. One, I'm trying to smooth out the inside, but I'm also kind of pushing it out to create the shape. So I want to get a nice round shape. So I'm pushing the clay out against the palm of my hand to get a nice even round shape to the pot. So I can hear the radio in the background. Sorry about that for the distraction. Oftentimes I do like to listen to the radio. It just kind of helps the time go along and get a nice environment to work in. Give a shout out to WNCW in Asheville, North Carolina, and Radio Heartland in St. Paul, Minnesota. I've got the pot about the shape that I'm looking for and use an X-Acto knife to trim off the top so I get a nice even rim on it. A little X-Acto knife like this really works well for me. I just find that it's just helpful in a lot of different kinds of ways. So then I want to just kind of check the profile. I'll probably smooth it a little bit more at this point and then set it aside to rest again until I'm ready to put on the next coil, which might be the last one. What I'm doing here before I put on that next coil is just smoothing and shaping. And the more work you put into smoothing it at this stage, it will save you time and effort later on. So I'm looking at it to try and make sure that it is as round as I can make it, and it has the profile that I am looking for. The pot has sat for an hour or two, and now it's ready for another coil. Once again, you can see how I have the coil tilted in the direction that I want to create the pot. I'm pinching out my last coil, and I want to make sure that I have plenty of clay here to complete the rim, because it always takes a little bit more clay than you might think. For me, doing the top, the rim, is the hardest part, and you want it to look good because this is the part that people really see. So I've got the rim pinched up as high as it needs to be, and I'm cutting it off. And here you want to take your time. I have got the pookie so it's not wobbling around. You can see I have a place to hold the knife so that it is level, and I'll hopefully get as flat a rim on it as possible. So I think this is pretty good for right now. Now I want to get the hole cut in the middle, and so I have to find something that is the right size and I can place it in the middle. then I can cut around that. I could eyeball it, but I know that I would never do as good a job as doing it this way. Not authentic, but it's a shortcut that I'm willing to take. Making a recurve rim for me is actually the hardest part of this whole business. I'm not sure what to tell you other than just be as consistent as you can. Always hold your hand in the same position and slowly work your way around and periodically check your work. Here I'm using the handle of an X-Acto knife to help make that curve consistent. You could use a stone, you can use your finger, something that will keep it from being overly wonky. Here I do wet my fingers in the rim and try and get it in the right position. But at this point it is very fragile and I get it as good as I can, and usually then I just kind of walk away for a while. You can't see it real well, but I've got a piece of wet leather that I kind of fold over the rim to kind of smooth things out and get the edges even as I can, kind of clean up some other pieces as well. The pot is basically done. I'm just kind of smoothing things out a little bit. Then I will cover it up with a towel and let it set overnight and take care of the smoothing out tomorrow morning. So this is the next morning. The pot has firmed up considerably, and now the job is to smooth everything out. And you can see there's a pretty significant pookie line here. That is typical for me. Maybe you can do a better job than I can. So basically the first step is to do some scraping and then some stone smoothing. To start with, I used a scraper, and I just use a credit card, but you could use a gourd scraper, the back of a hacksaw blade, whatever works for you. Sometimes I wet the pot a little bit first, and it seems to scrape off a little bit easier. It sort of depends as to how leather hard it is. This is particularly good for getting out the high areas. I don't do this to thin the pot. I just do it to even things out. And then if I have particularly low areas, I will add little bits of clay to fill that in. Particularly with the pookie line, sometimes I have to do that quite a bit. A little hint, you can see that I have the pot sitting on a big piece of foam just to protect it. The pot can't really change its shape now, but it is fragile, and so you do want to be careful. The high areas have been scraped off, and so now I have to fill in the low areas, particularly around that pookie line. So I wet the pot a little bit and then take some fresh clay and kind of smoosh it into the low areas. And then what I'll do is get a little bit wet and get a stone that's wet and just rub back and forth. And you can tell when it's pretty smooth. In this case, I have a nice flat stone that works really well for me. You may find you have some other low areas. I have to add some more to it. You can even take a scraper sometimes and kind of smooth it out a little bit that way as well. But this will really pay dividends when it comes to painting. The smoother the pot is, the easier the pot is to paint. Once the low areas are filled in, then I stone smooth the entire pot. And I do it one section at a time. It works best for me to get a little wetness all over it and then go through it. And the pot needs to be leather hard. It needs to be soft enough so that the stone will push the temper down into the clay and you get a pretty smooth surface. Sometimes I use a little bit of a scraper. You can see me doing that here to smooth things out, and then use a stone after that. I go work back and forth until I'm satisfied with the final surface. I do the same thing with the rim, except that I am especially careful and use a really light hand because it is so easy to damage that rim, to chip it, and so on. So just take your time and be careful. The pot is basically done. I just wet it down a little bit, take a stone and smooth it out. I look for any irregularities. If there's any low spots, I can fill those in with little bits of clay. Notice I'm generally trying to go in a circular direction. That will give you a little bit better surface. Also be careful that if the clay is still a little bit on the soft side, you can leave little furrows and you won't have a flat surface, and that will kind of show up. So then basically you can just dry this and fire it, but another possibility is to take a really polished stone and smooth it even more, or you can finish it with some slip, let that dry, and then paint it and then fire it. But basically these are all the steps that I typically go through.
Well, as us Minnesotans would say, oofta, this took somewhat longer than I expected. You deserve an award for hanging in here this long. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Again, if you leave a comment, I will do my very best to respond. Until next time, this is Wes, wishing you health, happiness, peace, and love. Take care. Bye-bye.